Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's your girl Jaden. If you're new to my channel, you are welcome. And to those of you who are returning subscribers, I am grateful for your continued support. Guys, I'm sure you have seen the thumbnail, you have seen the topic of our conversation today. I want us to talk about autism. Autism is a very common aspect of mental health issue that most people talk about. Most people are familiar with what it is to be autistic, but I know that just like every other aspect of mental health, there is still huge gap in knowledge, and people would still benefit from any useful information out there concerning autism. I have mentioned some of the resources we use in mental health practice, your ICD-10 as well as your DSM-5, depending on where you are. If you're interested in additional information, by all means, get more information. I am going to give a general overview of what autism is. Because it's going to be a very long conversation, I intend to make this conversation today very concise. I am going to return with additional information, especially those who are at risk of having autism and the signs to look out for. You know, if you think yourself or someone you know might be autistic. But as always, please seek professional advice, speak to a psychiatrist, especially if you are having difficulty with any mental health issue that affects your everyday life. You know, remember some of our videos where we talk generally about mental health issues. It becomes a problem when it begins to impact on your everyday life, on your everyday functionality. That is when we encourage you to speak out and seek professional help. So going back to today's conversation, autism is a behavioral problem. If you remember my video on anxiety where I talked about neurosis and psychosis, I remember I talked about psychosis being that aspect of mental health issue where people have interferences with their mind, where you have people hallucinate, people have whether visual or auditory hallucination. I haven't made any video in details regarding this. I still plan to. But we talked generally that there are two broad categories of mental health issues. You have your psychosis, where people have impairment of the mind, where people cannot tell reality from imaginations, you know, the delusions of your mind, of their minds. And we also we were able to distinguish that category of mental health from neurosis, where we looked at issues like anxiety, emotional and behavioral difficulties. So autism is not that type of mental health condition where people have problems with their mind, where they cannot differentiate between reality and hallucination. There is no distortion of mind. There is no problem with psychosis. It is a behavioral disorder. And like every other mental health issue, some people who have autism can go on to live their normal, perfect life. You know, I will use that word perfect because I understand there is nothing perfect anywhere. But the point I'm trying to make is that most people who are autistic have no problem whatsoever living their normal life. But when it becomes a problem is where that problem, that condition, that behavioral disorder begins to impact on their everyday lives, or when it affects another person or family. So that is where we have to know what to expect. For you to know when someone has autism, generally speaking, there has to be 3 areas of that person's life that can be affected or has been affected. Number 1 is issue around communication. The second one is social skills. And then lack of behavioral flexibility is the third one. And as we go on in this video or in subsequent ones, I am going to talk more about these different aspects. But overall, you have to have symptoms that relate to 3 of these issues. Autism is a spectrum disorder. So it can be moderate, it can be mild, it can be severe. When people who have mild autism talk about it, it's almost like there is no concern. Again, going back to what I said, that unless it begins to impact on our behavior, we are good to go. Moderate, yes, there could be moderate interference, but when there is severe autism, these people might require significant support, significant support by someone else in order to live their normal life. Or even if they don't require significant support, they might require significant alterations or modifications in behavior or in the behavior of people around them just for them to cope. Notice that all this while I've talked about the word behavior is all around behavior. So we've talked about autism being a behavioral disorder. We've talked about autism being on the spectrum. Something else that is very important to note is that autism can affect everyone. There is no age limit. It can affect all age ranges. The only difference is that unlike most mental health disorders or mental health issues, autism tends to show up earlier on in life, usually during the developmental stages. So the whole idea again of this video is for you to arm yourself with information, watch that young person around you as well as yourself, just in case you are on the spectrum. So we've talked about what autism is. Autism is difficulty in behavior affecting three major areas. There is communication problem, there is social issues, as well as behavioral rigidity. In other words, most people who are autistic struggle generally across the board. Again, depending on the severity of your autistic tendency, they struggle with flexibility. Growing up as a teenager way back in Nigeria, I still remember, and in hindsight now, it makes sense, total sense, why some children were different from others. We had limited information, even parents, even professionals, health professionals at the time. It wasn't a very common and comfortable conversation to have. I still remember growing up, some people were classed as demon possessed, some people were classed as a Obanje spirit just because they looked different. Talking about those people who have severe autism, maybe Asperger's syndrome or any other category, that once you look at them, you can immediately tell they are different. We call them now children with special needs. But there are so many other children who, looking at them, you wouldn't tell if they are autistic. You wouldn't tell because it doesn't show. Again, remember, it has to be behavioral issues, behavioral disorder. So some people, most people that have autism, until you engage with them, until you watch them behave, until you see them interact with other people, other children, and you pay attention, you study them as well as their difficulties, the difficulties they have in relating with others, you can't really tell. But where this knowledge is very important is that when you understand the difficulties a child has expressing his or herself, you would be able to understand that child better. But apart from that, you would also be able to modify your own behavior in order to adequately support that young person, or even an adult, or even yourself. So I believe that in our next conversation, you would come to understand more about autism. You would come to understand more about the sacrifices and the alterations you need to make, the modifications you need to make in your own behavior, as well as your expectations of another person. Now you can, at the end of the series, begin to excuse or make allowances for people who are around you, who you will go, hold on a minute, now it makes sense, now it's adding up, So that is my aim with this video, guys. I want to keep this as precise and as concise as possible. I don't want to overload us because it's a long conversation, but at least let's get it started. Thank you once again for your time. If you have watched this video to the end, I hope you've taken something out of it. And I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Until then, bye now.